What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Real Podcasters, where we help you grow and monetize your podcast. My name is Skylar Beitendorf. I am a podcast coach, and it is my mission to help you reach your goals with your podcast. And today, we are talking about ads. That is the biggest thing I hear from people. When they talk about monetizing their podcast, they think ads, they think sponsors. Now, if you do run ads, which there are pros and cons to running ads. Let's just get into it, okay? So if you do run ads with your show, how many ads should you run on one episode? How long should those ads be? And what kind of ads should I have on my show? So if you have a podcast and you are currently running ads, maybe you're thinking about running ads, what ads should I run? Let's first talk about the type of ads you should run on your show. Now, I will say that there's no right or wrong, but there is going to be some that are going to be more relevant. So if your goal is to run ads, or if you are running ads, you want to make money with those ads, right? Whether it's your own ads or ads that someone else, like someone sponsoring you, and then they want you to run their ads. If you are running their ads, they are doing so expecting an ROI, a return on their investment, which means that if they do not have your listeners buying their product, it is a waste of money for them. And if it's a waste of money for them, they are not going to continue paying you to run their ads on your show. It is just fine to take ad deals from whoever when you're first starting, if they want to, because it also depends on how much you're charging them, how often you're running their ads. Like if you got a big business and you're charging them $100 to run one 30-second ad every episode, great. They probably don't care all that much to get a big ROI. They just want people to know about their brand. But let's say, for example, you run a podcast on, let's say it's marriage counseling or coaching, and you are running to run ads on it. I probably wouldn't run an ad on your show that talks about a window cleaning business. I used to do window cleaning, which is why I say that. But is probably just not relevant to those listeners. Your type of listener is someone has a struggling marriage, or they have a good marriage, but they want it better, or they can feel it starting to fall apart. A lot of people, they go to these places when they're in distress, when they look at improving something. It's funny, I become an immediate mechanic when something goes wrong with one of my vehicles because I'm like, I'd rather fix this myself. But I don't go to learn how to fix something until it starts breaking. And I think that's oftentimes the same for a lot of the listeners that we have for our different podcasts. Like when they have a problem, that's when they pay attention. So if you want to help your ads, your sponsors get the biggest ROI on it, you got to make sure you pick the right ones. So if you're selling marriage counseling, or it's about marriage and how to improve your relationships, I would probably sell or have a ad on your show that is relevant to those people. It could be counseling. It could be, like therapy, which is what I'm talking about. It could be like couple retreats with, other groups of people. Honestly, it could be things to help with intimacy. It could be so many different things, right? There's a lot of different options, but you wouldn't want to run an ad that is not relevant to your audience, because you're going to have to keep getting new sponsors, where if you get the right one, you are going to be able to help sell their product and service, so they will make more money. And guess what? Your audience is going to grow. Your audience is going to love you because they're putting exactly what they need in front of their face, which is going to help you. It helps them. Your audience grows. You make more money because you're going to be able to charge more, because you're going to have more downloads. It helps all around. But if it's never relevant, it's honestly just annoying to your listeners. Now, let's say you do get the ad deal. You're excited. It's first time. What do we look at? There's a lot of different things to go over, and there's just not enough time to go over every little detail with this. But you first want to look at, is this a host read ad, or are they giving you an ad? I would always charge more for a host read ad, because your listeners have heard your voice so much that they trust your voice more than some random person's voice from the company that is sponsoring your podcast or running an ad on your podcast. So charge more for host read ads. But like the caveat to this is, if you're brand new and you're just learning, just charge a flat fee for the ads that are put on your show. Charge a flat fee, make it simple. This is your first one. You're learning how to do this. You're learning how to run ads, where the ads should be placed, all these different little details that you didn't know were even a thing when you thought about running ads on your show. So just get the ad, just land the deal, make it happen. Now, number 2, you got to look at how long these ads are. If you're running a 3-minute ad on a 15-minute podcast, well, that is a big chunk of the podcast. And that is going to be really annoying to your listeners. There was a podcast, The School of Greatness. I really like the host of that, Lewis Howes. I really like his stuff. I like what he's about. But the first and only time I listened to his podcast was a couple years back, and he just had so many ads on his podcast. I was like, this is just not worth my time. I believe he had far too many ad minutes to the minutes of value he was giving me for listening to his podcast. So you want to make sure you have a right ratio there. Quick rule of thumb, if your podcast is under 30 minutes, you get one ad. One ad. If you're doing more than one ad, it's too much for your listeners. If your podcasts are only 5 minutes, your ad needs to be extremely quick, right? Because if it's 1 minute, it's a fifth of the entire episode. So just keep that in mind. If it's under 30 minutes if your podcast is under 30 minutes, one ad. And you want that ad to be no more than, honestly, 30 seconds, a minute tops. If it's longer than a minute, you're going to have people that are going to either turn off your podcast, they're going to get annoyed, or they're just going to skip it. So it doesn't matter anyway. So you got to keep them snappy. So basically every 30 minutes, you get one ad. So if it was an hour long, you can have 2 ads on your show. If it's 45 minutes, I'll leave that up to you. I would say yes if they're short and snappy, but if you have 2 1-minute ads on a 45-minute podcast, I don't know. That's up to you. And I will say I'm not the biggest expert on placing ads on my show. I never really went down that route, but I looked heavily into it and did a lot of research on it. And I've listened to more podcasts than 99% of listeners. And I've been able to detect I've just looked at when I start to get annoyed as a consumer, as a heavy consumer of podcasts. And a lot of this also comes from my personal podcast coach. But you got to make sure you're not annoying the listeners. That is the biggest thing. So make sure you don't have too many ads and they're not too long. The next thing I want to talk about is where to put these ads. I've heard some people say they should go at the very beginning, so that way your listener for sure hears the ad. You should put it in the middle of your podcast. You should put it at the end of the podcast. What's the right thing? The answer is what people are actually listening to. So this will change a little bit per podcast. I personally don't like putting them in the beginning. Now, this idea that the listener is going to for sure hear the ad in the beginning, especially if you're selling your own product or service, I think it's true. They will hear it, but there's also a high chance they are going to skip your ad if it is first thing. So think about your listener. Before they hit play on your podcast, they've turned on their phone, it's in their hand, they're scrolling through, they choose your podcast, and they click play. The first thing they hear is your ad. The phone is still on, it's still in their hand. As soon as they hear an ad, what would you do? I would skip until the actual content is there, which means they're not hearing any of it, which also means if they're skipping it, they don't want to hear it. It means they're kind of annoyed. So for that reason, I personally don't like running ads at the very, very beginning of a podcast episode. Now, I think the next best place you can, if you want it to be in the beginning, is give your hook. Tell them why they should listen to this episode, what they're going to get from it, get them hooked into the episode. Talk about who you are as a host really quick. Talk about the show, what the show is for, and then you can run your ad like a 30-second ad or even a plug. A plug is like 10 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, where you're just saying, hey, really quick, there's this little thing I want to tell you about. It's going to let you do this. This is offer. And if you want to hear more about it, I'm going to talk about it at the very end of your episode. So you can do a plug or you can do a full ad right there. But people by that point have put the phone down, and so they are no longer able to skip. They're already into the episode. They're listening. And so they've put it down. They're willing to listen to 30 seconds of ads, one ad. They're willing to listen to 30 seconds of an ad and to not have to pull out their phone. Once you hit a second ad, they might pull out their phone. Now, can you place one in the middle of your podcast? Absolutely. I have been told by my coach that he doesn't like to do that because he feels it just interrupts the value that you're providing to the audience. And it can be annoying when you're like so honed in on an episode, your listener's very honed in, and then an ad comes up and they're like, oh, but they're also eager to hear the next part. And a lot of times they're folding laundry, they're on a drive, they're not going to take the time to skip it. So for me personally, I think if you have a 30-minute podcast or a 45-minute podcast and you put an ad, like a 30-second ad right smack in the middle, I think it's just fine, just from my own personal listening experience. But he personally doesn't like it. I think that one's a personal preference. If I get a better understanding on exactly what that should be, I'll let you know in a further episode. But to me, I don't see a problem with it. Now, the end. I think the end is, for every place you put an ad, there's a pro and a con to it. The very end, what you run into is people have finished the value of the episode. They're done being entertained. They're done listening. A lot of times people pull out their phone when they can sense an episode is ending, if they're able to, and they are going to pick something next to listen to, which is why a little plug at the beginning is very valuable, because they're like, oh my gosh, there's going to be some offer, some cool thing, some free thing at the end of the podcast for me to consume. So they're going to stay. If you don't do that though, you can run ads at the end, because in my personal experience, when I'm driving, folding laundry, if I'm working and I just have headphones in, I just let the next thing play and I see what's going to play next, whether it's the next episode of that podcast, another podcast, music, whatever maybe I have in the queue. And so I'm not going to take the time to stop, pull out my phone and listen to the ad. And so I would say that's most people too. They're not going to stop and pull it out as long as it's not too many ads, which is why it's so important, not too many ads. And I would also recommend, I didn't say this earlier, but if you have multiple ads on your episode, you have a longer podcast episode, put ads in different spots, maybe one in the middle, one at the very end, or one in the beginning, one at the very end, or, just if you have it all at once, people are more likely, if they keep hearing ad after ad after ad, they're going to pull their phone out and just skip. And they're going to get more annoyed. Every time a new episode comes on when I'm listening to it, a new ad comes on, every time I'm listening to it, it just gets more annoying. I was like, I already listened to one. Oh, there's another. Oh, there's another. It's annoying, right? Now, there's a whole nother idea on this. That's where you create a subscription, like an ad-free subscription on Spotify and Apple, so they can listen without hearing the ads. And I hear that. I think that's a good idea. I would not do that in the beginning of your podcast building though, because if you run ads at the beginning and annoy people, it can hinder your growth. But, it also depends on how relevant is it, where do you place it, how long is it? So I would just say overall, just be very strategic with your ad placement and what ads go on your show. But if you already have ads and it's working for you and they're keep paying you and you're making good money with your podcast and it totally goes against everything I'm saying here, keep doing what you're doing. Unless you want to take it to the next level, then you might want to apply some of the things I'm talking about. But what's most important is that people are consuming the entire podcast. So when you put ads in your podcast, go look at the retention rate. Go see if people are dropping off. If they're dropping off right when an ad hits, it means that your episode wasn't good enough for them to take the time to listen to the ad to continue it. You just be like, I'll just listen to something else anyway. If there's going to be ads in this isn't even that good. So look at it that way. And if this episode was helpful to you, subscribe to the show, subscribe to Real Podcasters on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Go subscribe. I have a goal to hit 100 subscribers within the first month of this podcast. And be sure to share it with a friend, family member, someone who is starting a podcast and needs help growing it. And until next time, keep podcasting.